Consumers want to know the facts about the products they buy, but America's agricultural landscape is not easy to navigate. Between different companies, scientific advancement, government regulations, advertisement campaigns, and an unhealthy amount of myth and misconception, anyone would be hard-pressed to make sense of it. That's where Real Ag comes in. From the producers who make your food, to the store where you buy the final product, and everything in between. This is Real Ag. Now, here's your host, Kyle Bauer.
This year on Real Ag, we've looked at elk, buffalo, extreme weather, and even took a trip to the 3i Show. We found out what makes a weed noxious, how game birds are bred, and how pet food is made. It was an interesting year for Real Ag, so let's have another look in this year's year-ender episode of Real Ag.
Production of Real Ag is made possible in part by an underwriting grant from
the Kansas Soybean Commission, the Soybean Checkoff, progress powered by farmers.
The 3i Show is basically industry, implements, and irrigation. And our little slogan is, you gotta go to the 3i Show. First of all, they created a thing called the Caravan. And there were about 8 or 9 companies in western Kansas, and they decided we'll go from town square to town square to town square, and we will be a show in the town square. Well, the minute that they would be done in that town square, they'd load up and go to the next town square. Well, that went on for a while, and then all of a sudden they realized, we've really got something here, maybe. So the very first 3i Show was in 1953 in Hays, Kansas, and that's where the first one happened. It's been in a lot of cities since then. Colby, Pratt, Liberal, that's just 3, and of course Garden and Great Bend. Well, then in 2012, this building was laying on the ground in a bankruptcy, and it was north of Scott City. It was going to be a manufacturing plant. We had the opportunity at that point then to get this building, and 28 semi-truckloads later, it came to Dodge City. 7 months after that original landing in Dodge City, the show happened. 7 months. This whole complex was put together by our building commissioners here. That's what they were called, building commission, but they were also county commissioners. And that's how this facility was created.
We've got to get the message of agriculture out in the urban areas. I think there's a lack of understanding for what rural life is like, for what agriculture is really like, and we've got to continue to promote our industry and open up markets overseas and do all that we can do to get the best value for our products. I grew up on our family's farm in Quinter. I was the 5th generation to live in my house, and we farm, and we have corn, wheat, cattle there. I now live in Salina with my wife and 4 small children where I do commercial real estate brokerage. Dad and brother farm in Quinter still, and then on my mom's side of the family, they farm in Johnson. But we're great. It's great to be here today.
Basically, what we're working on now is making certain that we get the right and appropriate dates to have the show, because we've had it in times when it's been a little more difficult. And the ag economy right now is having some issues, and so we're trying to make certain by surveys and all kinds of information to have the show in the right date. The 3rd week of March is what our exhibitors, as well as the folks who come to the show, the patrons, farmers and ranchers, said this would be the one to pick. Our plan, of course, is to keep refining all the things that we think need to be here. Not want to be here, but need to be here, so that when producers come, they're going to get their questions answered regarding the future of agriculture. We hope the latest technology's here. We hope people are able to see what they need to see, but also get their questions answered. This is one of those shows where you can go and talk to the person that built that, piece of equipment, or the person that's really involved with all the technology issues. It is changing so rapidly. One of the discussions that we're having here, because we're at 3I's is industry, implements, and irrigation, or how are we going to change some of this irrigation work that we're doing? And one of our presentations will be that this year.
What is the difference between a bison and a buffalo?
Same thing. One's the scientific name, the other one's kind of a nickname. They are bison. Buffalo is actually an African or Asian animal, but it's a nickname from the early days.
Are they an endangered species?
No. During the bottleneck, late 1800s, we got down to, I don't know, less than 1,000. It depends on who you ask. Of course, it depends on who you ask how many we had to begin with. But we're numbering probably fairly close to 400,000 now between the U.S. and Canada.
How big is a full-grown buffalo?
Some of the older bulls can get up to 2,600 to 2,900 pounds. Those are some really big ones. Cows typically are 1,000 to 1,200, and there are some 1,500 pound cows, but not too many.
How far will a buffalo travel?
Well, that's kind of up for debate. I would imagine they could travel a long ways if they wanted to. They're a rotating grazer, and so they tend to not move great distances like in a migration. But I would say 20 to 50 miles is what they could move if they wanted to. They could probably move more than that, but there would need to be a reason. I would say typically you'd probably cover a 5 to 10 mile area and just do their normal rotational grazing that they do.
Does it take special equipment or fencing to raise buffalo?
No. 5-strand barbed wire does the trick. They work really well with electricity if you have electric fence. A lot of guys use high tensile electric, and especially in large acreage areas. We like to use a high tensile woven wire fence. It's about 4 foot tall, and we put it 6 inches off the ground and then put 1 or 2 barbed wires on top, and so we'll end up with a fence about in this area, and they do really well with that. Of course, that's in low pressure areas, and corral system needs to be a little stouter and done a little differently.
How did you get started raising elk?
In 1988, I decided to start farming, and I looked into alternative farming methods, and one of them that appealed to me was raising deer and elk. It was in its infancy at that time. Nobody was really raising them for meat, and the U.S. was importing like 2 million pounds at that time from New Zealand. And so I had an option of buying some animals from upstate New York, 100 head of fallow deer, and I also bought 4 head of elk from northwest Colorado. And so that was my start of my herds.
Has the elk business grown?
Well, we used to until the government got involved. Yeah, I paid $1,200 a head, I think, when I bought mine. And it got as high as $6,000 a head. In fact, there was a bull that sold for $100,000 10 years after I started.
Are there government regulations with raising elk?
They want everything tested. They want everything tested from neighbor to neighbor. They want to test it for TB and brucellosis. If you go across state lines, there's TB, brucellosis, blue tongue, and antiplas, which cattle don't have to be. Why do elk have to be? And now the state of Kansas required us to get a permit to raise them. Well, and all it is just a moneymaker for them, because they never show their face here anyway. They want us to have an 8-foot high fence to keep our animals in and wild ones out, to keep the disease, if we have any, keep them in our fences and make sure that the wild ones don't get the disease. But we're more worried about the wild deer giving our tame ones the disease.
What is a game bird?
A game bird in Kansas generally is a quail or a pheasant. Then you can also add prairie chicken and chukar onto that. But chukar are not wild in Kansas, but they are considered game birds under our program.
In the context of what we're talking about, a game bird is a bird used in the hunting industry, either pheasant, quail, chukar partridge, Hungarian partridge, some of the grouses.
How do they differ from other birds?
Well, you got birds that are protected by the federal statutes, And that's most of your songbirds and your raptors and that sort of thing. So if you get caught shooting a robin or a blue jay, that's technically against federal law. And then we have some birds that came in that are not native to the United States, like the English sparrow and the European starling and the pigeon, and they're not covered under our laws other than you need a hunting license to hunt them, but they're not protected. But most of the time we have the game birds, which you can go out and hunt, and then you have the birds that are protected by the federal government under the Federal Migratory Treaty Act.
What kind of birds are raised in the state?
We raise raise and hatch pheasants, chucker partridge, and bobwhite quail.
Are the birds raised only for hunting purposes, or are they used to repopulate areas?
Most of them go for hunting. Some are used for repopulation, but a vast majority of them are for hunting.
Back, Wildlife and Parks, when they used to be Fish and Game, way before I went to work, back in the 60s, they actually had pheasant and quail farms where they would try to repopulate. But our modern theory, and the theory ever since I've gone through college, is spend the money on habitat. Because if you're going to release these birds out there, they're just going to make some coyote or hawk fat and happy. They just don't have the survival techniques taught to them by their parents. The last couple of years have been pretty good for moisture, but before that we were in like a 6-year drought. Our quail and pheasant numbers were way down. We had the big fires in southwest Kansas that's just decimating them. The Waukene had a big hailstorm right about the time the chicks were being born last year. And so, yeah, we have issues like that, but by far the best thing we can do is improve the habitat for them.
Are there a certain number of plants or trees you have to keep in stock?
Not really. There's ones that sell a lot better than others. Red Point maples are always really good sellers. Taylor junipers. The bread and butter items we grow on the location here, and then the hard to get stuff that we're not really very qualified at growing, we'll bring them in. We got a truck coming from Independence, Missouri today that'll be unloading here. Hopefully it might be unloaded right now, and then we get some out of Oklahoma. We get some out of some more out of Missouri, and so we grow the stuff that we can grow easy and sells good, and then bring the rest of the material in.
Yeah, there's definitely some more popular items that we sell more of. I mean, you got to have your staples with the crab apples and your shade trees like a Red Point maple. I mean, maples are really popular because they have fall color. As far as shrubs go, you got to have your boxwoods and your yews, and some of your dwarf spireas are probably your most popular, but we always have those around.
We're a commercial landscape company, and so we primarily grow for what we use in our landscape designs. And tree-wise, we have about 30 trees that we grow ourselves in our nursery here. We also grow or have about 50 to 60 varieties of shrubs that we maintain and grow for our commercial use there.
What is organic agriculture?
I think it's, for the general public, they think of it as farming without the use of synthetic chemical fertilizers and pesticides. But it's more complex than that. It's regulated by USDA's National Organic Program. There are comprehensive standards that not only address pesticide use, but through what's called an organic system plan. An organic operation lays out their soil fertility, soil management program, pest control programs. It's in many ways more based on agroecological principles to control pests and provide fertility, management of manure. And there are, the standards require extensive documentation of the production practices, the grain handling practices, and documentation that goes along with grain as it moves through the marketing system.
When were the standards put into place for organic farming?
Organic organizations started developing standards in the probably starting in the mid-70s. I think USDA's National Organic Production Act, I believe it was passed in 1992 and implemented beginning in about 2000.
What's the difference between certified organic or other organic food?
Crops or if food products have an organic label, they should be labeled. The USDA requires that they be certified. There is one exception, and that's for farms that raise or sell less than 5,000 in gross sales of organic product. They can be exempt, but they are required to complete the organic system plan and maintain the same kind of records that they would even if they were certified. Most, if they're going to be selling anything organic, are going to go ahead and go through the certification process so they can put that certified label on their product.
Is the Organic Farms Producers Association a group that people could reach out to if they wanted to start their own organic farm?
Yes, we get calls regularly, 3 or 4 a month is what I get. And there are some of the certifying bodies and others will get some calls. We've got some educational materials we can email farmers. We can put them in touch with some of the certification organizations. And we'll, visit with them by phone as much as they want. There's a tremendous amount of information online on organic production. USDA is developing more educational materials and other organizations are developing more materials. We do some workshops each year on organic transition, marketing and so forth. So I think if people need a place to start, we can help them get started. We can refer them to other resources. There's actually quite a lot of help out there.
Across Kansas, is pet food production and manufacturing a huge moneymaker?
It's a huge moneymaker for the state of Kansas. Again, $7 billion worth of economic impact to the state. It employs almost 20,000 workers, and that includes everything from ingredient procurement to buyers of equipment manufacturing, the actual processing of the food. It is predominantly in the northeast sector of Kansas, but we have some facilities that are out by Great Bend, and then in the southeast by Frontenac. There's some really great facilities all throughout the state.
Food industry, not pet care or anything else, is about an $80 billion industry worldwide. 26 or 27 billion of that is in the United States. And I don't know that there are any data that talks about specifically by the state of Kansas yet, although I do know that the state is working on that as far as economic development. But quite a few of the primary pet food producers, the brands that the consumers see in the marketplace, have either headquarters here or have major manufacturing factories here. Most of the equipment supply vendors upstream and downstream of Winger are also located in Kansas. Universities such as Kansas State really, of course, focus on food and feed science. Kansas State also has a pet food minor program, which has been very important, not only for Winger and for other vendors that are supporting the pet food market. But it is, I think, very well understood at the state level, at the legislative level, that pet food as an economy is really vibrant in Kansas, and it's something that Kansas, in fact, from the cereal grain production all the way to equipment manufacturing to the actual production of the food, pet food is really something that the state of Kansas can excel in. Domestically, pet food it continues to grow. It's typically single-digit growth, but the value of that market is continuing to grow. Pet food has become more expensive as consumers treat the pets more like their own children. So the value and the importance of food safety, food quality and control, all of those things are very important. So the value add of pet food continues to grow. The science, the technology behind it continues to grow in importance. And again, something that the state of Kansas is very well situated to continue to capitalize on as we continue to learn more about formulation, cereal grains, other types of crops that are nutritious for pets. That will continue to grow.
What water conservation measures are utilized today?
Well, water conservation really in western Kansas is all about reducing pumping, reducing the amount of irrigation water applied by adopting technology and using different crop varieties to ultimately slow down the decline of the Ogallala Aquifer is really what drives the technology farm effort out in western Kansas.
We're actually formed a WCA, a water conservation area, so our historical pumping, we've cut back 15%. But to help us do that with technology, we've actually, on a center pivot, we've been using IWABs, and it actually throws water out in droplets. We're converting every pivot to either bubblers and or dragon line, and it puts the water right on the ground. Reduces evaporation by at least 95%, so the water actually does hit the ground instead of evaporating in the atmosphere or up on the leaves.
How can I make my property less vulnerable to wildlife damage?
It really depends on the species of wildlife you're talking about. For example, if you were to try to reduce the damage that would be caused by deer, you would want to modify the habitat. All wildlife problems are solved with the acronym HER. H would stand for habitat modification, E would stand for exclusion, and R would be removal. So almost all wildlife problems can be resolved by one of those techniques. So habitat modification would be take away the things that deer find useful on that particular property. It might be food, it might be cover for hiding.
How do I remove a wild animal or bird from my property?
Well, it really depends on the animal. Sometimes if you're trying to relocate an animal, that would be the removal. They can be removed dead or alive, but if you're going to relocate them, the first thing you need to do is find the location that you're going to move the animal to. Is that habitat suitable so that that animal has a fair chance of surviving once they're moved? And then secondly, do you have permission on the site where you're going to release the animal? Then you come back to what animal it is and select the appropriate capture technique. Usually that's a cage trap.
What is extreme weather?
Extreme weather refers to rare weather phenomena that occur from time to time. In a normal day when it's sunny and weather is relatively safe, we don't really call that extreme weather. That's more what we would call potentially normal, safe weather conditions. But every once in a while we have rare event phenomena come up. We're talking about tornadoes, hurricanes, which are not going to be affecting us here in Kansas except for the remnants occasionally. We're talking about tornadoes, blizzards, major fire weather patterns, ice storms, for instance. Those are examples of extreme weather that have the potential to produce deleterious effects on life and property. These rare event phenomena are very important that we forecast, message information about them so that people can put their safety plans together and then know what to do before the weather strikes.
Well, we would define extreme weather as basically anything that's way out of the ordinary, and that could be extreme heat, could be extreme cold, could be drought conditions, could be severe thunderstorms. Obviously not in this part of the world, but hurricanes. There's lots of different kinds of extreme weather, and I think sometimes we focus just on the extreme weather that's destructive, but we also have to think about temperatures and also storms too. So lots of different kinds of extreme weather that we see.
What classifies as a weed?
There are a number of different definitions for weeds. The ecologists define a weed as a plant that invades disturbed sites and has different ecological characteristics that make him weedy, so to speak. There was a philosopher who once said that a weed was a plant whose virtues have yet to be discovered. And so that's another common definition that's used. Another one that we oftentimes hear frequently is a plant out of place. But the most practical definition to me is simply a plant growing where it's not wanted. Because again, whether you're talking about an agricultural field, somebody's lawn, or a garden, if you don't want it there, then it can become a weed. There are some crops that can be weeds, for example. Volunteer corn can be a serious problem in soybeans, and likewise volunteer wheat is one of our most serious weeds that we have in fallow.
What are major weeds we have in Kansas?
Well, obviously we have quite a variety of different species of weeds in Kansas that can be a problem, but three that I would probably rank near the top would be Palmer amaranth, which is a pigweed species. Palmer amaranth is very aggressive and very competitive with our crops, and it now has developed resistance to 6 different classes of herbicides, and so that also makes it very difficult to control. So to me, Palmer amaranth is probably our worst weed statewide. Another related species is common water hemp, which is more common in the eastern half of the state, and it has many of the same characteristics that Palmer amaranth has. Again, a very competitive weed, developed resistance to a number of different herbicides, and so again, very difficult to control and very troublesome, especially in our summer row crops. The third weed that I would categorize as one of our most problematic weeds is kochia. Now, kochia is most common in the western half of the state, but it's a problem for many of the same reasons. Again, it has developed resistance to many of our different classes of herbicides, and especially glyphosate with all 3 of these. And again, that's part of the reason they become so difficult to manage.
From animal pests to water tech and organic farms to tree farms, it was another informative year for us. Don't forget, if you want to check out this and more episodes of Real Ag, go to SmokyHillsTV.org. For the Real Ag crew, I'm Kyle Bauer, and this has been Real Ag.
Production of Real Ag is made possible in part by an underwriting grant from
the Kansas Soybean Commission, the Soybean Checkoff, progress powered by farmers.